Platform as a service application hosting providers like Vercel and Netlify are extremely popular, and that's for a good reason. They allow you to deploy an application within a few clicks and essentially abstract away all of the infrastructure setup of an application. That's very good, but it has some drawbacks as well. One drawback is that most of these services use a cloud hosting provider to host your app, like AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure, or their own cloud infrastructure, but you essentially pay a premium for using this managed platform instead of a raw AWS compute instance or a virtual private server. They're more expensive. On top of that, they can usually have unpredictable pricing models, and you can end up with a very high bill because of a DDoS attack or some unusually high traffic to your app. On the other hand, going with a virtual private server has a lot more drawbacks because you end up with a virtual instance of an OS, Linux OS, and you have to set up everything from scratch. And that is quite a task, especially if you don't have the experience or if you're deploying multiple complex apps. Now, there is a solution to this which can make the VPS or DigitalOcean droplet option not as unappealing compared to Vercel and Netlify. Coolify is an open source platform which you can install on any Linux OS to essentially run your own platform, sort of like Vercel and Netlify, where you have a user interface and you can deploy a containerized application or a static site within a few clicks and manage resources and many other settings for your app. In this video, I will show you how to set up Coolify, and we will actually deploy two demo apps, a static site and a Node.js application. Let's get into it. Okay, here's what I have prepared. Let's first go to the two applications we'll be deploying. I have this Coolify demo static site, which is just a repository in GitHub with a static site, an index.html file with some text and styles, just so that we have two files, basically. That's a frequently deployed asset, just a static site. And the other demo is Coolify demo Node.js, which is a Node.js application. If I open the index.js file, you can see that it's a Node.js app built with Fastify, a single API that has an endpoint which returns some JSON, in this case, hello world. Pretty simple. This covers a lot of use cases for deployment of static sites and Node.js applications. Now, if we go to coolify.io, we can see the installation process for self-hosted is very simple. You just curl a single install script and execute it. To do that, you need root access to a Linux OS. If I go to the docs installation, you'll see the requirements. We run on x86, basically MD64 and ARM64 architectures and most Linux repositories. This means Debian, Red Hat, SUSE, Arch, and Raspberry Pi OS. Most of these cover most Linux distributions used wherever. Okay, so let's do the installation now. You can install it on any virtual private server with a Linux operating system, and I would recommend looking into DigitalOcean droplets, for example. Here you can get a droplet for quite cheaply if you need just simple cloud computing with very predictable pricing. You can start at $4 per month, for example. You can also take a look at Hetzner. They also have competitive VPS offerings. Here we have cloud shared virtual CPU, etc. with competitive pricing. You can also deploy this on AWS instances and other alternatives. Essentially any VPS you can buy. You can host it on your own Raspberry Pi at home even. So let's go to self-hosted. This is the deployment, the installation script, and for the demo, I am running a virtual machine with Ubuntu server. Essentially, whatever server you have, you need root user access to it. With SSH or some console, you get to this point. And from this point, you just copy and paste this command, this curl command, which executes the script. In my case, I will actually need to type it because in my Hyper-V console, currently copy and paste from the clipboard is not working. But I will fast forward the video. All right, so I have typed my commands And now I can execute it and the installation starts. As you can see, the Coolify install script recognizes I am running Ubuntu 24.04 server version, and it tells me which Coolify version it will install. And you can watch the installation of the dependencies and required packages. This isn't some dark magic. Essentially, you get Docker and pretty standard deployment stack. So I'll fast forward to when the installation is complete. Okay, and at the end you get this congratulations, your instance is running, and you can you get the link with your external IP and port 8000 to open the Coolify dashboard. In my case, I will not open the public IP. I need to check the local IP address of this droplet, which is this one, 24, I think. All right. And if we open port 8000, we get the create an account view, which will open the first time after you open this admin panel after the Coolify installation. So I'll create my account. All right, so I register now and it prompts me to get started and do an onboarding, guided onboarding. I'll skip that. You can run it through. Not that helpful in my opinion. And here we have the Coolify dashboard. I'll zoom a bit. Pretty standard. We have a couple of options which we might go through quickly. I want to focus on the most important aspects of this, which is currently you have a server, localhost, that is the server the Coolify is running on right now. And in most cases, you want to deploy on that server. You can add multiple servers too. That is an option right here from servers. You can press add and add other servers, including Docker Swarm support. Now, what you care about most is projects. Projects are the actual applications you will be deploying. And here we can add a new project right now. So I'll start with the static site demo, as it's a little bit simpler. I'll call my project static site without a description, and I choose an environment. By default, we get a production environment, and we'll use that because it's the only environment we have. You could spin up some testing environments here. And resources will actually be the application source you'll be using. As you can see, when I add a new resource, I get Git as an option, which we'll use, a public repository in this case. But you can also use a Docker image file, compose file. You can choose a database to spin up from Redis, Postgres, and others. Or you can do some of the other services that are offered as ready-made ones. For example, Nextcloud or OpenBox, PHPMyAdmin, just basic services. Now let's focus on deploying custom applications. I want to choose my custom repository, localhost, and the Docker instance in my localhost server. And then we have the repository URL. I will copy that from GitHub and just paste. When I click check, it finds the package. Now the branch is main, the only branch. And here we have a build pack. Nixpacks is by default. We can use Nixpacks actually for a static site. We just have to tick that. We also have the option for static, which you see later is just Nginx, which is just fine. I will use static for this deployment. And here we have the configuration before we deploy. We have the name of our basically application. Then we can add a description. Most of these fields are pre-configured well. I'll go through them very quickly. We have the build pack again. I will keep it static. You see, static image, we have Nginx Alpine and a grayed out option for Apache Alpine, but Nginx is great. Now we have to configure a domain. Now in a production environment, you will of course have a domain name which you bought somewhere and just point it to the IP address of the server where Coolify is running. As this is a demo I'm running now, my workaround for this is to actually use my host file to create a sort of local domain name. I'll call it coolify.local, which I'll point to this IP address. This way, I mean, I have domains I can point, but they take some time for DNS propagation, DNS cache propagation basically, and they wouldn't work immediately. This will work immediately, but only locally on my computer. So in your case, if you're deploying a real application, Again, you would have a domain and you would point it to the IP address where Coolify is running, the IP address of your virtual private server. Now, after I point this domain, I will configure the application to run on it, and the static site I want to run on a subdomain, which will be static, like this. And here we have to retry as administrator, save hosts. And now let's do static Coolify Waco. Yeah, this is the domain I want. I need to press enter for the application settings to be updated. And as you can see, after that, we have some Docker settings. We can do build options in Docker settings if we need to. This is a static deployment, so that's not necessary. The port is 80 as this is a Nginx running. This is running Nginx container and it's a static site, so it's even grayed out. You can't edit it. These are the generated container labels. And in the advanced settings, we have some, through the settings, you see many things. Here we have some basic, for example, some basics. For example, we can do post HTTPS and gzip compression. What's useful, let me see. The useful items are, of course, the webhooks. You can use a webhook with an API to force redeployment. This is extremely useful because you might want to set up continuous integration with custom scripts. We also have Git webhooks for GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. These are useful. What else? We have resource limits and rollback. This is also very useful if you're running a production site. Here you have your images, and if something goes wrong, you can roll back to a previous image after a deploy. This can save you. Yeah, as I mentioned, resource limits, tags for classifications, not that important, and you can delete. Now, this is the server it's running on. Basically, these are the settings. The good thing is the defaults are pretty good. You rarely need to modify them after you set up. You rarely need to modify an option from the default. So let's click deploy and deploy our static site now. Okay, and now if I go to static.coolify.local, I get my static site. This is the HTML and CSS I basically, the static site I created, just single page with this style. So my deployment is running and it indicates so right here. If I go to projects, my static site, production, I can find it again. From here, I can redeploy it, or I can even force redeploy it without cache so it downloads all containers from scratch. And again, I can set up continuous integration with this webhook. I might make another video where we deploy a single app with full CI/CD from Git, including unit testing and the whole basically deployment workflow through Git, Coolify, and how to run integration tests, build, etc. But now let's do a Node.js App Deployment. Again, we create a new project. This time I'll call it Node.js App. It will be in the production environment, of course, and the resource will again be a public repository. I will copy the repository URL. All right, this time we'll use Nixpacks. Nixpacks is a very neat basically app which packs your application in a container image depending on what your application is basically. And I use it very frequently for Node apps to package them for deployment. This will use it automatically. You don't need to worry about Nixpacks at all. You configure the port and you just press continue. That's basically it. Again, here I only need to set up the domain in this case. I will create a new domain here for that app because it's a separate application running on the same domain, coolify.local. I will use Node. Let me copy that. Press enter to save. Make sure you press enter because if you just type the domain and click deploy, it wouldn't save the domain in this field. It will take you some time to troubleshoot that. You need to press enter to save changes. Or you can press save at the category on top. But deploy will not implicitly have the latest values in fields. This is a drawback of this app in terms of user experience. And let me see. I think we exited. Was there an error? Let's see. Okay, the deployment just finished successfully and the application is running. One note here, you are in configuration when you click deploy. This is where you're sent immediately after you create your project. Here you have a couple of tabs. One of them is deployments. You can see all of your deployments. And when you click on deployments, you see the deployment walk. This walk is a very general overview. If you want details on the deployment and troubleshooting, you have to basically click show debug walks. Here you have more specific information about what's happening. For example, creation of containers, etc. You can debug properly. You have walks here as well. This is the walk for the actual server. And you can see what's happening. Running node source index. Basically, it starts the node app. Very useful because you have to troubleshoot applications. This is necessary. And you can send commands to the server as well. But now let's go to links and open the app. And as you can see, it's running correctly. It returns the hello world JSON. A note here, you usually would need to configure the port with an environment variable. And you can set environment variables here in the configuration environment variables tab. And here I can add a variable, for example, port, and save it. And this variable is now available and I can use it in my configuration in my Node app. And that's pretty much how you set up a static site and an Next.js app. As I mentioned, I'm currently pointing the domains in my host file, but that doesn't really matter. You can buy a domain name and wherever it is, Namecheap, GoDaddy, whatever domain provider will allow you to point the domain name to a certain IP address of your virtual private server. The other thing you have to note is you can, as I mentioned, set up continuous integration with webhooks, where you can force deployment in GitHub Actions or Jenkins with another webhook or whatever continuous integration workflow you have. I will make a video on that topic. It will be a separate video for the full CI/CD workflow with Coolify, a Node.js app, for example, but the app wouldn't be important, and GitHub Actions. Servers, you have your localhost server. I'll just go through the options very quickly. Sources, here you can add your GitHub source, meaning you can integrate your GitHub account basically with the GitHub API with Coolify. This will make it easier to do certain operations with GitHub, basically. You can connect S3 storages. This is used for backups. You can back up your application. You have shared variables here, which you can use in the environment variables, basically. Here you can define team, project-wide, environment-wide, depending on where you need to use them. But this is useful because there are usually variables you might need to use across multiple apps. Keys and tokens, I mentioned we have webhooks. They have authentication. So here you can add API tokens here, basically. That's useful. Tags, there is a classification option for your projects and individual deployments and resources. You can tag them. That is, if you have so many resources you cannot keep track of them, you can add tags and you can export them here by tags. Command center, this allows you to execute commands on your server. Basically, the server I have is currently localhost, and if I run pwd, it outputs root. This is useful for debugging, just quick debugging. Profile, this is your user profile, nothing interesting. Teams, here you have basically your teams. You can have multiple teams and members. Of course, this is a platform, so your team members, if you're an organization, can join just like they can in Vercel, Netlify, etc., which is great. And in settings, we don't have much. The domains of the instance, DNS servers for validation. We have the auto update option, and you can backup here. You have some email settings for this is for reset password for just the functionality of Coolify, essentially where users reset their password or get their confirmation email invitations, etc. And an authentication option for Coolify for OAuth. For example, you might want to enable Azure very frequently or Google. And that's pretty much it. Then you have the onboarding, which I skipped, which is a guide, and you can provide feedback or sponsor Coolify. And you have the logout option. Here you can switch different themes, and themes are basically a container for all of these sub-resources we have. But yeah, that's pretty much how you use the app. As I mentioned, I'll make another video for a full deployment process from code, GitHub Actions, testing to a redeployment in Coolify. And so stay tuned for that. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to subscribe to get notified when another video is released. Take care.